The Big 12 is sitting at the big boy table with a hand around the NCAA's throat. How relevant is the NCAA and where is next? This is Locked On Big 12.
You are Locked On Big 12, your daily podcast on the Big 12 Conference. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Happy Wednesday, everybody. Welcome to Locked On Big 12. I'm Drake Toll from America's #1 Big 12 podcast, Locked On Big 12. Thank you for making this show your first listen every single day. Today, Immaculate View on Twitter joins the show. One of the most well-connected, not just expansion, but I want to say college sports expansion experts as the sport itself grows into new avenues. Today, we'll go through the Big 12, sitting with Charlie Baker and other power conferences, separating itself from the rest of the country and even from the NCAA. We'll also go over the Pac-12 wanting to be an 8-team league, and Florida State and Clemson to the Big 12 might just be a sham despite all this equity stuff. Immaculate off the top here. The Big 12, the ACC, Big 10, and SEC met with Charlie Baker, private room, close the door, give those four conferences even more power to separate themselves from everybody else. At what point does Charlie Baker, the NCAA, at what point do they no longer have power over the other four names in the room?
Well, immediately upon seeing that, it tells me this is the Autonomous Conferences Group. We've talked about them in the past and said watch for that to be empowered. That's basically what's happening. And further into, we're kind of queuing off of Ross Dellinger's report.
When you say Autonomous Conferences Group, for somebody who's just now getting into this space, what does that imply for these four leagues?
It was something that was actually created in 2014. They were wanting to do small payments for student athletes because they actually foresaw these lawsuits were coming.
Yeah.
And they were being not allowed to do that. And so they threatened in 2014 to leave the NCAA over it. And they were given this Autonomous Conferences Board with very limited governance, the power to control some of these type of student payments. Like they started with like a $2,500 payment to them and it's gone up to like $5,500. So students have been getting paid. Student athletes have been getting paid for a little while now, but it just wasn't enough. But that's who I'm speaking of. It's already created. It already exists. It was the A5, with the Pac, but since they've fallen below 8 schools, they don't meet the NCAA threshold anymore. It's now basically the A4, and so that's who we're talking about.
And you mentioned Ross Dellinger, you brought that up. The "let the big dogs eat" quote is in there, and a lot of his reporting has pointed to the haves. He says that the haves are separating themselves from the have-nots. If you are the Big 12 in this situation, again, how irrelevant is the NCAA becoming as you get more power?
Well, there's certainly less relevancy, but part of doing this, and the reason for doing this, is that you don't want to take on all the responsibilities of the NCAA. Yeah. People say, well, why don't they just leave? Well, there's a lot that the NCAA deals with and takes care of, that if you leave it, you have to set all of that bureaucracy up yourself. You have to do all of that work. And I just don't think that they really want to do that because they could have left already if they wanted to. So it's kind of the best of both worlds. It's near full governance of rules and rule making, probably within the entire FBS. But then you still have the NCAA there, which is, the government entity overseeing it and as kind of your go-between and your shield, which is what we're seeing right now with the settlement situations, is that the NCAA is kind of the shield.
For the Big 12, in respect of being in the room with the ACC, the SEC, and the Big 10, is there an air of the two biggest conferences, being the SEC and Big 10, having more power at the top level than where the Big 12 sits in conversations that involve the NCAA?
Now, if we're talking absolute power in terms of votes, no. The way the voting there works is 1 vote per school, and then each conference has 3 votes, and they generally put in 3 student athletes. So there is some student representation in this as well. Yep. They each get 3 student athlete votes to come into that. Now, in terms of real power, would their word at the table have more sway? Probably, to some degree. What degree that is, different people will say different things. But in terms of voting, that's not how it's set up. Like it would the Big 12 and the ACC would still have all their votes. And technically, if you have more schools than those two conferences do in the future, which the Big 12 might due to its lower payout, you're technically getting more votes.
We've talked about power for those four conferences and what they get by being in the room where it happens with Charlie Baker. There are another 28 league commissioners. One of them is quoted by Ross Dellinger saying, "I didn't even know they were meeting." Mm-hmm. Have we, with this, officially killed off everybody that's not in that power four?
I don't think so. Now, will there be some individual schools that end up backing out of this and maybe go down? Possibly. That gets down to a smaller situation, but it was also reported in there that they gave their permission for this to happen. And that's what, in my opinion, needed to happen. I don't think the NCAA would have given this power to those four conferences to basically rule over the others. Right. Unless they said so, because you're once again getting into legalities of not having any, self-control. You have to give that up.
There's a great quote in here that says, what people have to get in their heads, the Power 5 schools are not like everybody else. This group they do control, alongside the NCAA, the future of college athletics, and it's less so what matters in the ASUN or what matters in even the American Conference that has some major schools. Those opinions have effectively been buried for what the Power 4 and Charlie Baker want to happen in the future of college football. And does the future of college football feature a Pac-12 revived? Immaculate, let's go there. Next, the Pac-12 wants an 8-team league. This is Locked On Big 12, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Today's show is brought to you by eBay Motors. Oh, what's that? You hear out in my front yard a 2016 Nissan Maxima that is rumbling, bumbling, and stumbling. It's got a little brr, 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 brr when it runs. That's usually not good. You kind of like that, like a Mustang, not a Nissan Maxima. Well, I went to eBay Motors. I was like, eBay Motors, I've got a belt thing that's not working. And they said, well, we have superchargers, roof racks, exhaust kits, LED headlights, and more, including belts. 122 million parts to be exact for your number one ride or die. And those are guaranteed to fit with eBay's Guaranteed Fit. With eBay Motors, you're burning rubber, not cash. So I got the little part. I tried to install it. My car was still going brum, 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 because I'm not very good at the installation thing. But the part fit, and it works, and now I'm good to go. Keep your ride or die alive at ebaymotors.com. Eligible items only. Exclusions apply. eBay Guaranteed Fit, only available to U.S. customers. That is ebaymotors.com. Immaculate View on Twitter. There is now a stir about the future of the Pac-12. I find it very interesting that they want to move to 8 teams. Scott Barnes, the athletic director at Oregon State, said months ago, apparently 8 is the right number. It keeps you nimble. Is the Pac-12 coming back with 8?
I would list it as a potential. When you're in this type of a situation, you probably need to have more than one potential solution for your problem. You're looking down the line, you're seeing this has to happen, then this has to happen. And as more of these events happen, such as us finding out about governance, you can now see some other moves happening. Like we'll see what the ACC does, who goes where, who doesn't go where. That might determine what they have to do. So yeah, at some point they do need a plan for what to do with the Pac-12 in case that becomes the eventual result. And we talked about that with the 8 team. I do agree. You want to stay as small first initially, get what you can, and not go at the networks with a much larger group that you need much more money for.
Sounds like Oregon State and Washington State, and I get why their attention's been pulled this way, are now focused on rebuilding the Pac-12. And a lot of this comes from John Canzano, who says, it's quoted in here saying, the Beavers and Cougars have until the summer of 2026 to reach a minimum of 8 teams and meet the NCAA's requirement. Is the focus now, if you're Washington State and Oregon State, to recreate the Pac-12, or should they be turned to an ACC that might have a spot coming up?
I think that's their first. Whether it's the ACC or Big 12, if something was to come out of there as an offering, that's where you're going to go.
Yeah,
it's not even a question. But you got to have your backup plan. If that doesn't come, what are we going to do? And part of the problem with that, though, is that they've made a deal with the Mountain West.
Correct.
And part of that is about not splitting it up and doing things. And the Mountain West knows about this, because then you go back to the history of the WAC. You're basically saying the Oregon State and Washington State would do what the Mountain West schools did to the WAC. So they're very aware of that type of move. So that's what interests me in that, is how will they respond to this?
Right. And if they want to go to 8 and they've just signed a deal with the WAC, then like a Boise State, UNLV, a San Diego State, how do you try to convince teams that are in a conference, the Mountain West Conference, in that conference that you've signed a contract with, to abandon and then come join you? I just don't. What I'm struggling to see here, Immaculate, is how 8 can be viable enough to generate revenue more than the Mountain West already does.
Well, 8 is the magic number for the NCAA. You have to have 8 to be a sanctioned conference.
Yeah.
So you got to get to at least that. And that's why I think he's probably sticking at that. Like, that's right. The lowest possible number that you want.
I love that the quote is, it keeps us nimble. No, it's the minimum. It's the reason you want to get to 8. It's not to be nimble. It's to reach the minimum.
Like if that was 6, like it used to be, he'd probably say 6.
Correct. Yeah.
So I think that's largely why he's talking that number, is he's saying to whatever potential deals that they might be able to work out, like, look, we're going to keep this to the minimum amount of payouts possible. So, they've now got deals with CW, they got deals with Fox, they might talk with ESPN. Who knows who they might try to talk a deal with? But you're basically saying to them out loud is, we will be as small as possible, so that way the payment from you to us will be as small as possible.
The hurt that's been put on those two universities in the last year, from athletic directors leaving for rival schools to head coaches leaving and abandoning, and I get it, right? They went from being a Power 5 school in the Pac-12, Washington State and Oregon State, to, in essence, off the table. Is this the best case scenario? I mean, for me, right, we talked 6 months ago about the Big 12's viability, and a lot of things shook up in the ACC that hurt the odds of those two schools making it in. And then you talk about the future of the ACC and do they have a chance out there? My question becomes, what is right now the best case scenario for Washington State and Oregon State? And is it an 8-team Pac-12?
No. That's probably worst case. But it's not bad.
Yeah,
but
yeah.
I think if they're really looking at what they want, they're either looking to maybe fill in with the ACC, or best case scenario to bring it back to the Big 12. And I know a lot of Big 12 fans aren't hot on this idea, but their best case scenario would be to get in the Big 12, in my opinion.
Yeah.
You join the other 4 teams. Maybe after we get governance, we see divisions. If you're to go to 24 schools and have 4 divisions of 6, they would fill right in with your West. So like you'd bring Colorado over, you'd have Utah, BYU, Oregon State, Washington State, Arizona State as a 6-team Western division. So in my opinion, that's still their best. Now, whether or not your Big 12 fans who follow you would think so, they might say differently.
If that's the question, then can Washington State and Oregon State get to the Big 12 as of today, late June of 2024? Is the answer still yes, it's on the table?
I would say yes is a possibility, but the answer to them is a no for right now. Like, we need to see other things happen. We need to get details on governance. We need to see where the ACC goes. Big 12 is looking at ACC first.
Yeah.
First and foremost. They're not going to take up spots with Oregon State and Washington State while they're still looking at possibilities to the east. So once we see how that plays out, we could probably find a better answer for Oregon State and Washington State.
There is a very good chance in that Oregon State and Washington State, as all of this settles out in the next 6 months, have some sort of clarity. Is that a true statement? Is 6 months a timeline that those fans can rely on?
Some sort of clarity, yes. I wouldn't say 100% clarity, but I do believe we are going to start having some answers this summer before football starts.
And boy, when those answers come out, Immaculate will be right here on Locked On Big 12 breaking it down for us. There is certainly turmoil with the a possible rebuild of the Pac-12 and the Mountain West. You go to the ACC, and I think there are a lot of dominoes that need to fall in those next 6 months, or as you said, even as early as this summer, before we get full clarity on not just Washington State or Oregon State, but also the Big 12, who was recently rumored to be in the ring for Clemson and Florida State. Now, Brett McMurphy's brought this up before. We've heard this conversation on multiple different avenues, and it's mostly been shot down. But now certain sourcing is saying, hey, what if with this private equity deal, the Big 12 is a lot more viable? Let's talk about that next on Locked On Big 12, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Today's show is brought to you by LinkedIn Talent Solutions. Look, LinkedIn Talent Solutions is where I go to make new hires. Because I'm in essence a small business. I have Toll Marketing LLC as my small business. And what I need to do is hire for people who run social media. I hate doing like the press tweet thing. You know, I like to tweet funny things sometimes, but Zach, my new intern on social media, has been spectacular. He came from LinkedIn Talent Solutions. 70% of LinkedIn users don't visit other leading job sites. If you're not looking on LinkedIn, you're looking in the wrong place. On LinkedIn, 86% of small businesses get a qualified candidate within 24 hours. Hire professionals like a professional on LinkedIn. LinkedIn knows that small businesses, myself included, are wearing so many hats, and they want to help make the whole process a lot easier for you. They're constantly finding ways to make the process easier. 2.5 million small businesses use LinkedIn for hiring. Post your job for free at linkedin.com/lockedoncollege. That is linkedin.com/lockedoncollege to post your job for free. Keep in mind, terms and conditions do apply. Immaculate. Going into this week, the last thing I thought I would see was certain sourcing on Twitter insinuating that Clemson and Florida State could be Big 12 schools because of a private equity deal that would be over $1 billion or possibly in the billions, where a company steps in, they get some sort of control over the Big 12, naming rights to the Big 12, you become the All-State 12, something. Is that enough? I mean, I've always thought it was just silly, the idea that Clemson and Florida State could come to the conference. Is it enough if the private equity deal is there to lure those two in?
Well, if we're talking possibilities, are we saying it's higher than 0%? I would say yes.
Okay.
Would I give it
you're really making me confident now.
If I give it a large percentage chance, I would probably say no.
Yeah.
That does not mean that cannot work in your favor with some of the other schools that are generally talked about as a Big 12 edition, and that you generally get some pushback on, because people would say, well, the pricing is the same, the payout is the same, and then we have exit fees and stuff to get out of. That is what there's been some pushback. I've talked with others about how I think you could use some of that money to help with their costs to get out.
Okay.
Now, when you talk Florida State and Clemson, you're talking about the two top value schools there. Is there much of a chance that the Big Ten and the SEC doesn't take them? Probably not. Especially considering Clemson didn't file their court case until after the CFP deal was done. And we saw how much of that was based upon previous experience, previous times in the CFP in the past. That's when Clemson's value rose up considerably.
Right.
That's when they did their lawsuit. Pretty much tells us that their value to, say, the SEC went up that day. So I find it very hard to believe that either one of those schools would fall to the Big 12.
Yeah.
But if, say, like a Virginia Tech or North Carolina State or Louisville, one of these other schools is looking at saying, this is a straight across the board jump. We don't see how this is good for us. Okay, well, we have this money. We can help with all your costs to get out. So that way your future is more in check with us, and it's not costing you to come over here. Maybe that could be it. I'm not an expert in private equity, and if you could even use that to do that. Mm-hmm. But to me, if private equity is looking for an increase in value of the conference so that they can maybe sell their stake later down the road, a direct increase in the value of the conference via the addition of new schools gives them that value increase. So you might, if you're a private equity, you might want to do a quick flip, turnaround, sell your stake to another. It would be worth more because of those additions. So that's what I think about in that.
The where I want to start with the meat of what you give it, Clemson to me. I look at Texas. Texas could be bad at football for 5 or 10 years, and they're still going to be very valuable, profitable. The brand is still there. They have a lot of brand power. Same thing goes for Florida State, and both those schools have seen that. They've seen tough stretches in the last decade. I don't see Clemson, who historically has not been a money power, at the top. Why are we valuing Clemson so highly? Because if they're bad for 5 or 10 years, that brand is not going to stick.
It's a good point. I don't know. It's one of those unknowns. Does it last? Do they stay their crowd following is great.
Yeah.
I think that's probably going to stick. Their stadium is great. It's great for TV. So your network value is probably going to stick. In terms of the CFP, as long as they continue to use previous performance as a grade of what percentage payouts you're going to get for your conference, their value adds to a conference now in that regards. So I would lean towards they are, but there is some evidence to show that when they have fallen off a little bit, that their viewership has fallen off. So I might not give them the same grade as I would Florida State.
Yep.
But I'm still listing them as the number 2 value in that conference. Absolutely.
The SEC, the Big Ten, from what you've heard, are they up at the door waiting for Clemson to open? Are they knocking, waiting for Clemson to open it right now? Or is that a school that's still waiting on a landing spot because conferences aren't technically supposed to reach out yet?
I tend to think that these schools would not go to the lengths that Florida State and Clemson have gone to unless they have gotten some type of a wink and a nod.
Yeah.
However you want to say it came about, you're not going to that length, those costs, that effort, taking that PR hit, all of that, especially considering Clemson did it right after those CFP meetings, unless you've heard from someone, okay, you're there. What they are is it's like a value increase for, like, say the SEC wants to add in North Carolina and they have to take North Carolina State in order to get the board to allow it. And then you move into a Virginia school. Those are like territory grabs and moves and students, and there's a lot of things, but they're not huge moves for the network. So by them taking Clemson with that, you might make the network say, okay, this is a little bit more of a value add for TV to the ESPN. So that's where I look at it as I look at them as like a +1 with the networks. By bringing them in, it allows you to maybe bring in another school that's not as big to the network, but that you want in your conference for other reasons.
Going back to unpack, you mentioned Louisville or Pitt, or Virginia Tech, and NC State. Those seem to be the 4 that most people toss around. With the Big 12 getting close to this private equity deal that it just revolutionizes how conferences operate, does that give you a better shot of being of those 4 schools actively wanting to seek out the Big 12?
I think it gives you another round in the chamber. Okay. I'm not an expert on the financial side of that and exactly what you can do with that. And maybe the capital company wouldn't want you to use that money to bring in schools for legal reasons.
Yeah.
But I tend to think that if this is, all agreed upon in the end, that it helps you, because ESPN paid for Oklahoma and Texas to leave the Big 12 early and join the SEC. They gave them direct payments. So we do have a precedent for this happening. So yeah, I think it's an added effort and a help in that regard.
I wouldn't mind it. So that one out there, if those 4 schools are on the table, as a Big 12 podcast host, I would like to stay alive in general, and adding those 4 I think would not hurt. Immaculate, when it comes to being well connected, not just well connected, well researched and smart on these topics. I think smart's the right word. Nobody comes close to you. Where can listeners find more of your work?
Like you said, right now I'm largely just on Twitter, on X. Not doing as many of the shows. It's a lot of work with what's going on, but we're picking up now, so who knows? Yeah. But yeah, right now I'm just having a lot of fun, just hanging out and chatting with folks about it on X. That's where you can find me. You have me right there, Immaculate View. And by all means, reach out. I do like to answer to folks as they respond to me there. I learn a lot from others. I learn about their particular little situations with their schools, and we can't know everything. So the more people you have adding into the conversation, the better.
Love it. That is Immaculate at Immaculate View on Twitter/X. This is Locked On Big 12. And I can't thank you enough for coming on the show today. You've nailed it once again.
Well, like I said, I'm open to doing a lot more. I enjoy this with you. This is like the perfect amount of time.
Oh, yeah.
For keeping focus and discussing things. So as much as you want to do, I'm open to. And I think that you're going to have a lot of content here coming at you here within the next few weeks.
What a tease. And we will certainly be all over that. There are very few who are as researched as you in this topic, and they're always information. Like, I learn when Immaculate comes. I learn things when I come to the show. This has been and always will be. Thanks for making it your first listen every single day. Locked On Dose Grande.